Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to a presentation about the RAFT. And if you were thinking that we were going to float away somewhere, we're not. We are here to tell you about what we think is a very exciting tool. So I want to thank you all for coming and being with us for this hour. And my name is Tanya Denckla Cobb. I'm director of the Institute for what will soon be called Engagement and Negotiation at the University of Virginia. And
I'm Elizabeth Andrews. I direct the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School.
And Donna, do you pull up your mic?
I'm Donna.
It's on?
I'm Donna Crasher. We, in our little town of Saxis Island, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I'm the chairman of our local RAFT team.
Great. So you're here hopefully wondering and wanting to learn more about the RAFT, so that's what we're here to tell you about. We have purposely decided not to repeat everything that we said last year, so you may have questions if we haven't included things that you expected to hear. We're more than happy to answer your questions. Let me see. Okay. So first of all, the RAFT was founded really in response to a request. And the request was about how do we help localities use all of the studies and models and information and translate them into something that is useful on the ground so that they can make real change, meaningful change that is going to increase their resilience. And that was the gap that was presented to us in the form of a request of what can we do? And we put our heads together and decided slowly. Didn't happen overnight. It wasn't birthed overnight. Came about over the course of probably about 18 months for us to figure out how to put this together. And our goal is very straightforward. Our compass heading is to help Virginia's coastal localities improve resilience to flooding and other coastal storm hazards while remaining economically and socially viable. And that last part was considered just as important as the rest of the goal. And so who's the we that I'm talking about? The we is three universities that have come together, and we are really proud. I'm looking at Elizabeth because we have come to understand just how unusual this kind of partnership might be. As some of you may know, academics don't often play well in the same sandbox, and the fact that we have people from different universities making time to work together with each other, which is not always easy because of different time schedules and all the rest, is really, for us, become a big proud. So the three members of the team, the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School and IEN at the University of Virginia, along with the Virginia Sea Grant Resilience Program at ODU. And that is the we. And so the funding, how have we gotten funded for this? And the truth is that it's evolved. It's not as if anybody said, this is a great idea, here's your money, and go forth and conquer for the next 10 years.
If you want to, we're open to that.
We're open to it if you happen to be that person. So we have pieced it together through the years. The first bit of funding was from NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and since then we have received funding from the Virginia Environmental Endowment to help with the implementation piece, with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the Coastal Zone Management Program, to help with all three aspects, which we'll tell you about, of the RAFT, and then an anonymous donor that wishes to remain anonymous, obviously. And then also, we decided it's important for us to say that we also have put a fair amount of, what's the saying?
In kind.
We have in-kind donations. We have put a lot of our own sweat and tears, or no tears, but a lot of sweat equity, as they say. That's what I was searching for, sweat equity that we've put into this as well. All right, and so Elizabeth.
Okay, so the RAFT process, it has 3 basic steps, and all 3 of them are equally important. One is a scorecard, where it's a scorecard that we developed with the assistance of an advisory committee composed of academia and state government agencies and local government representatives and nonprofits. We go in and assess the community in various categories. We'll talk about that some more in a moment, to see how resilient they are to recurrent flooding. We present the results, I should say first, to both the locality staff, so nobody's surprised, and then to the local elected officials. And then we hold a community workshop, and we invite members of the community, citizen leaders to come, nonprofit organizations, the local government staff, and electeds to come and take part in an exercise where they develop a resilience action checklist, which is a list of items that they want to work on over the coming year, kind of the low-hanging fruit that would help them to become more resilient. And then one of the key parts of this is we stay with them for a year. We provide ongoing assistance with implementation of items on that checklist for a year. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about how important that is, that we don't just drop the scorecard and leave, but we actually work with them throughout the year. So this is an example of a section of a scorecard. I know that you can't read that. It's just to show you the layout. And also to note that there are 5 areas in which we score them. One is about their leadership policy and collaboration on this topic. How much do they collaborate in the community and set forth clear policy about it? Risk assessment and emergency management. Are they taking care of things such as shelters and food during shelters, and taking care of socially vulnerable communities at times when people need to be evacuated? Infrastructure resilience. Planning for resilience. We look at their comprehensive plan as well as their zoning ordinances and their hazard mitigation plan, et cetera. And community engagement, health and well-being. So we've tried to touch on a number of different topics involved in resilience. It's not just, as many people might think, evacuation and emergency management. It's much more than that. And this is an example of when I was speaking earlier about how we present the results to the locality. We actually go out and talk to them and do a PowerPoint presentation and do some mapping to show them the inundation that can be expected in the future, what's predicted. And here you can see the hours 1 foot above high tide at Kiptopeke State Park. So this was done for Northampton County. This is just a sample to show you, but we did that for each of our selected communities. And we also talked to them about sea level rise, and I'll leave this to Donna, but some feedback we've gotten from communities is a little surprising to us, I think, that one of the key roles played by the RAFT, one of the best parts of the RAFT, biggest benefits, is just triggering that community-wide discussion about sea level rise and resilience. And that took us by surprise. I think we thought people were talking about that a little more than they were. So that's a wonderful thing to learn and to build upon. And then we come up with a list of primary opportunities that they can pursue based upon their scorecard results. You can see the different categories here: flood exposure and vulnerability assessment, business and economic risk assessment, because too often we hear a lot of discussion about sea level rise and resilience, and people are not necessarily talking as much as they could about the business community and economic development, and we really try to wrap that into the analysis as well. Stormwater infrastructure being a big problem for many communities, not just because of increased inundation from storm surges and sea level rise, but also antique aged stormwater infrastructure that can't handle it. And then natural and nature-based features. Many of you all know that there's a big push for those, for green infrastructure to try to deal with flooding issues, as well as water quality. And this is another continuation of those examples. Water supply is a big issue, coastal resilience in their comp plan, and public involvement in resilience planning. And one of the things we've really tried to achieve as well is to not only help educate or inform people, but also to engage the community and get their input through the workshop, equally important. I think you're next.
So here we are at the workshop. We have assembled a group of people from each of the localities. In this situation, it's the Eastern Shore, it's 7 localities, actually only 6. We couldn't get Tangier to the workshop, but we are still working on getting out to Tangier. And representing each locality is a small group of people who have been identified and appointed as an implementation team. And ideally, what we learned from the prior year is that it's important, ideally, for this implementation team to be identified before the workshop. And they know going in that this is going to be a role I have. In addition, we invite a broad range of additional stakeholders. So it could be the state agencies from forestry or conservation and recreation. It could be local emergency management. It could be local health. And we have a long list of other stakeholders who get invited to this workshop who will inform the development of the checklist that Elizabeth just showed you samples from. And so at this workshop, they developed that checklist, and one of the things that we developed for them was, and this is interesting, is that we were asked in this round with the Eastern Shore to take a regional approach. The thought was that localities, that we would, because we are competitive, especially, a Western nation, the U.S. is seen as highly competitive, that, if we put the localities together, there would be a natural competition. Well, you got an A, and we got a B, and we need to get a better score. And turns out, so this is why we did this cross-locality analysis of the different scores. And we learned that actually there's really not much attention to the competition between the localities. That is not their motivation. So here, they really liked being able to see where they were in the Eastern Shore. We had scores ranging from a 39 all the way up to the top score of 75. And then what we did is we did the cross-locality comparison for each segment of the scorecard. So here's an example. We're not showing you all of them, but on section 2, which had to do with risk assessment and emergency management, is we're showing you that really across the board, most of the localities we were dealing with, the 6 localities, we're doing pretty well. You can see on the right that, that's a category that's maybe a little iffier. But generally, overall, you'd look at this and you go, they're doing pretty well. They're getting 3s or 4s out of most of the metrics. And then here's an example of where most, you'd say, are kind of struggling. And this was interesting because this is section 5 of the scorecard that has to do with community engagement, health, and well-being. And one of the things that we got asked by a number of the localities in the presentation phase, when we had done the scoring and we're now presenting the results to staff and to the local elected officials before we head into the workshop, we were asked, well, why do we care about this? Why are we rolling health and well-being into this? Should really be about infrastructure and evacuation, as Elizabeth was saying. And there's a great deal of learning around the issue of a truly resilient community means that they have the wherewithal to be able to sustain these acute on chronic disasters and stresses on the community that stress the economy and inevitably will stress their health and their schools and a range of things. So this is where the Eastern Shore is mainly challenged, is in this section. And so that's the benefit we have seen of being able to work at a regional level. We were able to identify some things that all localities are really seeing as major challenges and barriers, and we've lifted some of those up and are trying to address them more at a higher level for the region. And so here's a sample. This is Northampton County's sample. This is their action checklist. And what's really important to stress is that they develop it. We don't walk in and say, here's what you got to do, folks. We say, here are your opportunities, like we showed the 7 that Northampton County had. And they could have chosen just to do those things, but they sat down, put their heads together and said, where do we think we can make the most difference in that year? And there were some surprises here. One was, let's do a tour for the county administrators, planners, staff, wetlands board, all the people who are decision makers in our county. We need to get them out to see what a healthy ecosystem management area looks like, because that will really help them understand what we're aiming for. And people are really excited about that, and that is being planned for April. And that was a surprise that that would be considered at that level of importance and sort of triggering. Again, it goes back to what Elizabeth was saying, is it triggers the conversation that allows subsequent action to happen. I'll pull out a couple of other things. The 5 different maps, create 5 different maps to assist decision-making. This is the kind of, so I'll backtrack. The tour is something that one of the implementation team members is doing. The 5 different maps is not something they can do. So we are taking that on. We have GIS capacity, and so we're providing that to them. The establishing a basic needs preparedness list is an example of how the third sort of category of how things happen in implementation, which is kind of nosing around. Like we had to nose around to find out, well, how do we do this, and who knows what is needed, and finding out that this actually is a pretty big gap, that nobody quite knows it, and if anybody is here from VDEM, they get gold stars because the folks from VDEM really finally stepped in and gave us a lot of the information that we finally needed, that we will translate and bring back to the county for them. And so the last thing that I want to talk about before I hand it back to Elizabeth is the implementation. What does that look like, and how do we hang with them for a year? The way it looks like is we have monthly calls with the implementation team. And we're just basically helping them along by saying, how's it going? What do you need? How can we help? And for example, on the maps piece is we're sending maps back and forth with them. Does this display things the way you want? No, we need more color here. We need you to zoom in there. And so it's an iterative, very back and forth kind of dialogue that happens on all of these items in every community throughout the year. Each of the universities has taken 2 localities that we are sort of stewarding and working with as a partner on the implementation team. And with that.
So one thing that's important to note is that one reason I think this has been a successful project is because each team member brings a different area of expertise to the table. So Tanya at UVA not only has access to planning students, but also architecture or engineering if we need it, and also facilitation. Michelle Covey at Old Dominion University, some of you all may know her. She's a scientist, so she brings that to the table, also has access to ODU engineering. And then the Virginia Coastal Policy Center, my assistant director, Angela King, and I have a cadre of students that we can pull on to do legal and policy analysis for communities. And so that's been a great thing because these communities can have all kinds of different things on their resilience action checklist, as Tanya just pointed out. We started out with 3 pilot communities, a county and a city and a town. And that was a wonderful thing that they worked with us and gave us feedback so that we could get grounded in what is a realistic thing to score, what's really going to help, what kinds of things on the checklist would really help out. So what we're doing now in the next stage, we've just done the Eastern Shore as a region, as Tanya said, because there are 2 counties and there are a number of towns that have similar types of issues, and we wanted to reach them as quickly as possible, so we did it on a regional scale. And this is an example of the next iteration of the RAFT, I guess I would say, where we can actually pull together these information sheets on different topics that might be helpful to various communities. In this case, it's groundwater, which is an issue on the Eastern Shore for a variety of reasons. You can have anything from saltwater intrusion in your groundwater to depletion of your groundwater aquifer. And we can help talk to them about their drinking water wells and connect them with the state government to resources that are available and experts. We also talk to them about natural resources. This is one that was pulled together for Northampton County, but we can do them for the various jurisdictions. We're talking to Donna about doing some for Saxis next. And also, as well, economic vitality, as I mentioned earlier, is a big part of this. A lot of localities are concerned about both the potential impacts of sea level rise and recurrent flooding and the impacts of talking about it as well, I think. So we try to help them as best we can and connect them to various resources that are available to them. So there are a number of lessons that we've learned through this process as a team. One is just how important it is to go to the locality and present, first of all, to work with the staff of the local government as you're doing the scoring. Because when the students are scoring this under our supervision, they're trying to do it with the eyes of Joe and Josephine Schmo. You know, what can they find at the public library? What can they find on the locality's website? Locality sometimes has things that aren't as readily apparent that they've done. And so you should always check it, of course, for accuracy with the local government, staff, but also to not surprise anyone. Because if you're going to go make a presentation to a locality's elected officials, you're essentially making a presentation to the bosses of all the local government staff. So we thought that was very important, and I think this process has just re-emphasized that for all of us, how important it is. It also does that, what we talked about earlier, that generation of community-wide discussion, because people come to their local government elected officials meetings and they hear the presentation and then they get interested in it. The key role of the implementation team. It's been wonderful to work with Donna and others on the Saxis team, and in each community, that implementation team plays a wonderful role because we can't do all of this and we can't speak for the community, and hearing their voice is what's really important throughout this process. So they play a vital role, and having that team established even as early as you can, before the workshop, really helps too, because then they can be part of that discussion and figured out ahead of time, okay, this is, tag, you're it, you're going to be involved in these discussions in the future, and it doesn't just drop after the workshop. There's also long-term value of creating this community-wide discussion and strengthening collaborations for resilience. Some collaborations are already there and connections can be made again through this effort, and some are new connections that we can help them to make. And so that kind of a role in generating sea level rise collaborations can be very important as well. Presenting the scorecard findings in a manner that helps the locality to develop the most effective resilience action checklist that they can. I think that's something that we have learned and are learning still, because we present the results of the scorecard to them and they digest that. And then sometimes in the resilience workshop, what can happen is you can have a few voices that are more enthusiastic and they want a lot of attention for their particular issue, but it may not budge that needle too much on the resilience scale. So it's really important to take a step back and discuss all of the different scorecard results with the teams and go through them and make sure that all of our energy is being put into the actions that would help them the most. And then finally, how much the localities value these durable relationships with universities, that we're not just scoring and running, that we're there to try to help them for a year and answer questions or connect them to grant opportunities or research questions for them, has seemed to be very important to them. Yeah. So with that, I'll hand it back to Tanya.
Yeah, and just to say that one of the things that we're also learning from this is that when it's uncomfortable for us when we hear the localities talk about, well, when you leave. Well, the truth is that we're still being contacted by the first 3 pilot localities, and we're still trying to respond. And so what we're trying to think about how to frame this in a different way so that people don't feel like we're actually going to leave them, that we view this as an ongoing relationship that is not going to end at the end of the year. We're not going to be as intensive, but we certainly want to still be there. So that's part of what we're ruminating on these days. Our next step for the RAFT is we are going to be working with the counties and maybe some of the towns as well in the Northern Neck. And then after that, will be the Middle Peninsula. I have to say, when we started down this path, I think it was in 2015, is that I remember being told by some of the locality representatives that we were thinking, well, we'll do this, we'll do the Virginia coast over 10 years. And we were told, you can't let it go that long. We really need you to do it a whole bunch faster. And what is shocking to me is that it looks like we might be able to do that. So we're going through a region now sort of every year or 18 months. So trying to provide this tool. So with that, I think what I want to do now is hand it over to Donna Crasher from Saxis, and we're going to we'll come sit with you, Donna.
Because we don't like to be at the podium. There we go. Once again, I'm Donna Crasher from Saxis Island. We were really pleased. We're a tiny little town on the water. We were really pleased to be invited to speak about our personal experience with the RAFT team. For those unaware of Saxis Island, it's a very small, 1/3 square mile wide, large, big, on the eastern shore, directly west of Chincoteague. So Chincoteague's on the ocean. Saxis Island is on Pocomoke Sound on in the Chesapeake. The town was Saxis itself was established in 1666. So there's a wealth of history on this little town. I believe the original patent for Saxis was 250 acres. Coastal erosion in the 2010 census, and don't quote me quite, I think we're at 175 acres. We're somewhere about that. So coastal erosion is a major, major issue for Saxis. But I want to back up just a little bit. So, there was a whole bunch of us, the entire town, we all knew what we were facing. Lunar tide, nor'easter, we're not getting off the island. Our firehouse invested in a 5-ton military vehicle because we have young ladies pregnant, maybe going to labor, and we can't get them off. So now we do have that. However, you could see that coastal erosion, floods, tide changes is really a major impact to Saxis. So everybody that lives there, we all knew all the issues facing us. It's not until this was actually presented to us. And I equate it to many of us, I'm sure. You look in the mirror and you go, oh, not bad. Okay, I know I need to lose 10 pounds, but not bad. You go, you do your thing. Somebody happens to take a picture. You see the picture 2 weeks later and you go, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? So I equate this scorecard to that photograph where you thought you looked, no, I'm not bad. And then you go, oh no, I gotta start running tomorrow. When you see the scorecard, and I think if I could change anything about RAFT, scorecard it just doesn't tell you. In fact, I happen to have one. Just to give you an idea of what the scorecard encompasses. It's 50 pages of work and development and analysis that's been put together for us. I can't imagine, I think I would be history before any of us could ever get this amount of data together to isolate where our needs really were. Because only with this were we able to prioritize, not only prioritize, but sort of skim off what can be done right now. And okay, this one's going to take a while, but here's how we start this project. So Scorecard, it's really our Bible. We use this data, we use the scoring to know where did we fall short and which scores could we quickly amend. One was, and I don't know, there was a slide that you saw where we fell short on our scoring on emergency preparedness, but it was more or less the health and welfare of the residents and ensuring that those at risk were taken care of in an emergency. Well, the interesting fact is we all felt that we scored 100, not 20 or 30 or whatever, because we all know everyone. We know who is in need if we get flood tide and who's alone and who, but we don't have a written policy. And that was very important. We should have a written policy. So once the understanding was, well, yeah, we all know who, needs help and who we go knock, you okay? Because you don't want to depend on phones. And to be honest, cell phones on Saxis Island don't work real well. So that was something we could immediately change and put into action. Within, I think, I'd say within 6 weeks of us starting that hurricane, flow, was it Florence? Was it Florence? Hurricane, I remembered flow because, my centerpiece for the hurricane party was white boots. And I wrote flow on them, and I couldn't remember what hurricane. Hurricane Florence was coming. We decided to take that idea that we knew we needed to start something and create an emergency preparedness and wellness check. So everyone on the team went, and although some of it was really redundant for us, we know different people that we already knew the information. We wanted to make sure every single one of them was visited, or we know who was there and who wasn't. And that is also important because the who wasn't there and who is there, Saxis Island really has probably close to 50% vacation homes now. Many of the older families have died off, the younger families have sold off, moved off. This is a fishing village, and it was all watermen. And now it's not all watermen, but we still have watermen families. In fact, one of the people on the team is, she's a waterwoman and owns her own business. So we got two for the price of one on that one, because I'd like to explain how we created our team if there's time. Anyway, so Florence was coming, and we decided what we really didn't know is what vacationers are really in town, which ones were only there for the weekend, who was going to ride out the storm. So we added on to that, and that was the tax mailing. We also need to watch our budget. We're a very small town. I think property-wise, I thought it was 12 million in property value. I'm looking at my husband. I'm sorry, my husband's sitting right there. I think it was 12 million. But anyway, we took the next tax mailing and we created a letter, and we had to be really careful, and that was where the groups helped us, because we wanted to make sure legally we were asking the right questions or not, and letting them know how we were going to use the information. So, and you'll find this a lot with a lot of the projects. It does triple and quadruple duty, because in this specific instance, we needed to know who was going to be there for that specific storm. But we also, of course, wanted to create and complete the project, which we had made a priority, is to have this list and directive in place in writing. So with our next tax mailing, we sent out an informational about what we were attempting to do, because our non-resident, our vacation summer home people also get a copy of the taxes. And that was one way we knew we could get a hold of them. And explain what we were doing, explain that what we really needed to know was when there was a storm coming, they needed to let us know if they're not there or there. They have emails where they can email us, but we also ask them how they would like additional information. If there is an emergency coming up, do they want a text? Do they want an email? Do they want a personal phone call? So we're trying to take that same information and repurpose it over and over again in different projects. We're also creating a database with that. So that'll help.
So, watching our time, Donna, could you say what you think has been one of the biggest challenges, maybe that your team is? I mean, not everything is. We're painting a really pretty story, if you will, a pretty painting of what happens, but it's hard. It's hard work, and it doesn't necessarily come easily.
It is extremely hard work. It's, the good news about retirement, you have double the time and half the money, so I'm retired.
Actually, I don't think you've told them your role.
Actually, I am the chairperson, along with my husband, for the team. I coordinate all the effort. I'm on town council, and the mayor and I work very closely because we also work on the website. It's a work in progress. I'll take any help I can get out there. The Facebook page, Historic Saxis Island, we continue to update that. So we're using lots of avenues to try and get messages out. We also chair and all the events on Saxis because we're trying to grow our town more and more. But the one little piece that I did want to share with you is how we created our team, because the challenge that it is a challenge because 90% of our team of 10 plus, now I have 2 more just asked to join, 12, is that they all work full time. And so very graciously, our conference calls with the team are in the evenings. And we could have never done that. That is our challenge. Our challenge is getting everybody together. All the meetings happen in the evenings because we don't have a paid town manager. These are not people that work for the town. These are residents. These are stakeholders in Saxis, where some of them, their families go back generations and generations. And so there's a tremendous interest, but the challenge is finding the time. So we do try to, get as much done as we can, especially on our calls. We get lots of leads and help and support where you say, okay, let's go do this, let's go do that. Right now we're working on the flood maps that were shown of Cape Charles and Northampton County. Saxis is in Accomack County. We were all provided with the very large grid maps and showing, the flooding now and in the future. And we already knew that. We just hadn't seen it in writing. It was like that proverbial photograph. And that's when we said, well, we really have to work on this. One of the projects we're working on right now is reforestation. Department of Forestry was there 2 weeks ago. We have a follow-up meeting with them. We lost in Hurricane Sandy a lot of our, we don't have forests, but our, vegetation. We lost a lot of vegetation that was helping control some of the erosion. We also have the biogenic reefs.
So just to add to what Donna's just said, I think that that's a good example of how we have to meet each community where they are, and each one is so different in their needs. But one thing that is a tie that binds, I think, out in the Eastern Shore is that they're used to living with the water, and they are used to a changing shoreline, much more than some other communities might be, due to coastal erosion through the years. And so did I hear you say you had a hurricane party? See, I think they're used to dealing with this stuff. But because of that, you have to figure out, I think the community is often more resilient because of their connections with each other. I remember talking to Northampton County staff about a low-lying area, and I said, well, what do they do when a storm comes? And they said, oh, they all get out and they go stay with friends and family on higher ground, and then they just come back. when the flooding's gone. So that's the wonderful thing about a connected community. But if your community grows, then that is not the answer any longer. If your community floods to a greater extent, then that answer may not be suitable any longer. And that community was only, in that case, able to do it because they'd raised up their houses, which is expensive and takes a long time. And when I asked, what about the roads, they said, oh, those still flood, and that's why they have to go to high ground to stay with friends. So sometimes a community can have a solution that they think is working, but it may not work for the next round, the next set of data that's coming down the pike.
Well, let's open it up to questions, and if you could maybe stand and, it seems kind of cavernous out there, but, you know, speak loudly, say your name, and shout out your question. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if the NFIP communities that you've worked with, are they able to use RAFT as part of the community ranking system? Does it help benefit
Well,
or
that's a
can benefit insurers on their insurance?
May I take that?
Yeah.
That's very interesting, and it is something I wanted to bring up, but I tend to get wordy. Our scorecard actually had one of the, sorry. The scorecard actually had a section about the community rating system, CRS, as a project that we weren't even involved in. Well, as soon as we saw the bottom line, if you're involved in this and you start to work towards this, you start to save money. When it starts to hit people's pockets, it means something. And a perfect example, personally, before Sandy hit, my flood insurance was something like $500 a year. It is now $3,500 a year. So that added tremendously to our mortgage. With this community rating system, we started to look into it since that was something in our scorecard that we weren't involved in. Long story short, Saxis has just been awarded training from the Wetlands Institute for the CRS training. Hi, Mary. And April 29th, we're having an all-day training session, and then we're going to train those that aren't able to come. Many of the RAFT team members are also on that team, in addition to a couple of others that are very interested. And yes, that's so important that many of us weren't even aware of it. And we are going to be diligent. So now we have two separate teams going, and it's interesting that many of these projects, they really do overlap. They really do.
Great question. Thanks. Others? Questions? Yes. Yes, ma'am. So the question is really, how does the RAFT deal with issues of environmental justice and communities, especially that don't have the wherewithal in terms of resources to improve their resilience? And she mentioned Smith Island as one example. We had a focus group, actually, that in the development process of this scorecard. The scorecard, we didn't just make it out of whole cloth. That we looked at, I can't even remember, but it was 30 plus some other report cards and scorecards across the country for both sustainability and resilience, and had several different ways that different types of people were able to give input. And one of them was a focus group just on the issue of what we thought would be called environmental justice, and we were told really was better framed for Virginia's coastal communities as equity, really, for social equity. So we had a focus group around social equity and making sure that every element of the scorecard really was paying attention to this. And if you ever look at the scorecard, it is woven. We thought we would have a separate section on social equity, and the response from the participants in the focus group was, hell no. Oh my gosh, no. It needs to be woven into everything so that every aspect of what the community is doing is paying attention to the vulnerable populations and residents in the locality. So these would be, and the vulnerable, I mean, we had, Tangier said, like very much like Smith Island said, well, when we were talking with them about the scoring of their vulnerable populations, they started laughing and said, well, everybody here is vulnerable. And we said, yes, we understand that the entire island is vulnerable, and there might be some people who are even more vulnerable, like your elderly or people who have some disabilities of some kind, or youth, young children. And they started saying, oh yeah, you're right, we hadn't really thought about it that way. And so there is absolutely attention being paid to how do we address the vulnerable populations. I will give one example. In Northampton County, for example, one of the tasks on their checklist was to create a task force to deal with to address the issues, to identify their vulnerable populations around coastal resilience, and to develop messages and ways of reaching them. And this is part of the nosing around method that I was telling you about. It took us about, literally, I want to say about 5 months of nosing around and talking with different people to finally learn, which nobody on the implementation team knew and nobody on staff knew, that there actually is a group out there that is already dealing with vulnerable populations. And they meet monthly, and they bring all different agencies together. But the issue is that that group had not been thinking about, they've been thinking about opioid crisis, suicide, depression, school lunches, all of the things that we typically think about for vulnerability. They had not yet begun to think about resilience to coastal hazards. And so what's happening now is that that issue is going to be integrated into their work, and it's a slow process. We're going to be having meetings in the next few months, but the answer is yes. It is a slow process. It is an issue of raising awareness, even with people who think everybody on the island is vulnerable, as there are additional vulnerabilities that might need to be considered.
And once again, it's the RAFT trying to generate the discussion and connect the dots is a big part of it as well. Yes, sir.
One of the great unknown, not very much paid attention to issues confronting us in Virginia, and this is why this question is going to touch our friends in Cape Charles and up the Eastern Shore. Our governor right now, who is a champion of the Eastern Shore, is now in a situation where he has just finished battling with the Virginia General Assembly and run headlong into what appears to be a problem involving the Dillon state. Now, Virginia is a Dillon state. Close by, just up the Eastern Shore, is Maryland. Maryland has, in its constitution, item 11 guarantees the effective application of environmental issues. I believe that's an accurate assessment that I've just given you. Is the RAFT core team encountering any kind of resistance because of Virginia being a Dillon state, and you can't do anything in a locality unless you get the General Assembly's okay?
So, in case anyone's not familiar, the Dillon Rule is a rule of statutory construction that says localities cannot do anything, they're not authorized to do anything unless the General Assembly authorizes them to do it, in a nutshell, either expressly or in certain cases powers that need to be implied. But it's a restrictive doctrine to restrict local government's authority to just that given by the legislature. And that's definitely an issue in the sea level rise and coastal resilience arena, in that it makes localities hesitate just as much as it does in any other arena where they need to act. It's particularly tough, I think, because I always tell my students localities are in the crosshairs. They're on the front lines because that's where people are paying attention to flooding and sea level rise issues. That's where there's not enough funding to deal with it. That's where they need to make sure they have the authority to deal with it. If they don't deal with it, some people yell at them. If they do deal with it, other people yell at them. So they often have a very tough job at the local level. And that's why it's really important, I agree, for our state legislature to spell out for localities the authorities that they need. And one of the key things that we can do with the RAFT, again, this theme of kind of connecting the dots, making the connections and generating the discussion, is that we do try to keep in close contact with the new special assistant to the governor for coastal adaptation and protection to provide feedback to her about issues that we encounter, that we hear about, that localities are dealing with, so that they're aware of it as she's pulling together for the administration the very first coastal resilience master plan for Virginia that the governor called for when he signed an executive order last November. So we are very aware of it. We try to keep our ear to the ground and pass on when we run into it. But I think in an area where, frankly, retreating from areas is going to be necessary ultimately from some areas due to flooding. It's a very unpopular thing to try to deal with. I'll let Donna talk about it at the local level, because you're losing potentially tax base. It's not an attractive line to start an economic development campaign with. And it's a reality that localities have to face and figure out how to compensate for that loss of revenue and that loss of cultural fabric and community members. And sometimes the Dillon Rule can be a true hampering factor, and sometimes it can be a shield if it's hard to act in a certain area. So it can be both.
Thank you.
I don't really have anything to add to that.
Okay?
I think and I'm not an attorney, I'm so glad that we have a team on the RAFT so that we do have different expertise, and Elizabeth is fantastic to have. I mean, she's just a fantastic partner. Not being an attorney and not being in the weeds of the legalities is, from what I see, is that what holds the localities back, really the only thing that seems to be something that they can't really yet deal with on their own are issues around roads, because those issues are really dealt with at a different level. But most of the things that have come up on their checklist, so far, most of those things are things that they can pretty much, I want to say, I'm being cautious because then I'm also watching Elizabeth's face here. Am I right? I think most of them they're able to deal with. So, but the roads are issues that are problematic for them at the local level.
And I also do think failing septic systems, to bring up the sexy issue in the room, is going to be an increasing problem with flooding. You have septic systems that may be functioning today, but with increased inundation, they may not be functioning as well tomorrow. And I think that that's an issue that the state has got to, they're working to figure out how to do it, but it's funding. It's really funding at the bottom line. Just like with roads, it's funding.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. That's fine. Yeah.
Traditionally, in this country, we are reactive to flooding, not proactive. And part of that is because the federal government's going to come in and take care of it. It's okay, a hurricane hits, I'm all right. I've got insurance. The federal government's going to come in and spend millions of dollars. I think part of what you're doing is educating people and making them understand there are proactive things they can do at the local level and state level, not just wait for it to happen and then hope that somebody's going to show up with a whole lot of money and say, fix it. So I want to applaud you for what you're doing, because I think a lot of times people say there's nothing I can do about it, and when it happens,
Yeah, I think that's a,
How do you change that? I mean, are you seeing that in your outreach, though, in localities? That people are, you mentioned you were surprised that climate change is not an issue among people. So,
well, we were, what was predicted was that there would be a lot of resistance to discussions of sea level rise and flooding, and that there would be competition between the localities, and really we haven't seen any resistance at all. We've seen people actually saying, thank you so much for coming. Is we, like Saxis, we rarely get anybody paying attention to us at this level. The fact that they have 3 universities coming together around this saying, we're going to hang with you for a year and help you, you know, as best we can. And if we can't help you, we'll try to find people who can help you. That just, I think, is an affirmation. I think it's simply helping people feel acknowledged and feel seen. Like, we see you, we know you're struggling, we know this is real, and helps them understand that we need to take this seriously too, that what's happening to us is real.
You know, you're absolutely right. When you saw the steps in the process, well, the first step was the group came to present this tool to town council, and since they're public meetings to anyone there, or our normal council meetings, although public meetings, we don't get a whole lot of people coming because they all have a sentiment of, you guys are doing a good job, I don't need to be there. And I go, but it's your chance to speak up. I don't need to. You're doing a good job. Okay. So when the follow-up to that was actually an invitation to say, Saxis, if you're interested, come to the workshop. All right. Once again, it was just my husband and I were able to go because everybody works full time. We went. And our first project on our list was to go back and hold a special town meeting to explain this in kind of a good overview without going down into drilling down into 4.1. Because the sentiment we faced was, it's always been this way, nothing's going to change, it's, you know, every year I see that beach getting smaller and smaller, the water's coming up closer, nothing's going to change. But then when we showed them, but look what we could do, sentiment has changed for the majority. Not everybody. Everybody will ever, you know, the others are waiting to see if it fails or not. But I can tell you that after the first few weeks and a real good introduction at a higher level and not drilling deep to explain it, and then getting our team on board, and then between all of us making sure we're constantly getting the word out, it has really changed things around. And speaking to the government will bail me out, I was even surprised to know there are so many people that have homes on Saxis Island that have lived there. It was their mothers, their grandmothers, their great-parents, the generations beyond, that there is no mortgage. And guess what? They don't need to carry flood insurance, and many of them do not. So they knew there was no check to bail them out. So that's another piece of, although that's no one's responsibility but your own, agreed, but knowing how that sentiment, it can't be changed with some of the elderly and all. We as a community, even though we have RAFT, I go back to that, as a community, we're going to make sure that person, we do what we need to do to help them. And we've had fundraisers for people just to, and that's what we do. That's what we do. But this is certainly helping create more cohesiveness in agreement that we need to take the bull by the horns and start doing something for ourselves.
Well, we're at time.
Do we have a break?
We have, let me just say one thing before your question, is that one of the things I think we really want to emphasize is that the RAFT is is it's not the end-all and be-all, is it would be nothing without all of the other partners. Absolutely, Wetlands Watch, Mary Carson needs to be coming in, and there's all kinds of things that Wetlands Watch is doing, right? And CRS is just one of the many things. The Nature Conservancy out on the Eastern Shore has been powerful in what it's been doing for many years, and we're using the tool that they've developed. And the state agencies and what they're doing are critical partners in this. So I think one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that I think our power is not in like being the answer, but our power is in being the connector and sort of raising awareness and supporting the county team and the county staff in ways that they want to be supported, really.
Perfect segue for my question.
Okay.
Go for it.
Have localities been able to use RAFT in their portfolio for grants? I used to work in the government on grant. If someone came in with a plan, not just give us money,
Yeah.
so they have been able to use that.
Well,
I don't know, actually.
we don't know that they have been able to, but we know that some of them are trying.
There's money out there, but if you've got a plan
We-
and you go forward with a plan,
Right.
there's a better chance of
It's a great
There
question.
was an attempt, we'll put it that way, but
We think that it will be helpful, and it, yeah, go ahead. Anyway, so the answer is we hope it will be. We know that it has already led to some funding efforts.